Netflix's Sense8 has officially ended with its series finale. So now that it's done, are the 2 seasons worthy of the binge? Let's talk. In 2015, the Wachowskis collaborated with J. Michael Straczynski to bring Sense8 to Netflix. It ran 2 incredible seasons and was just getting started when Netflix pulled the plug. But after an outpouring, if not outrage, from fans, Netflix gave the Wachowskis an opportunity to wrap up the show's sprawling storyline with one final movie. So now we have an official complete series, more or less. So for you uninitiated, what is Sense8? Well, Sense8 tells the story of 8 people from all around the world who are all part of a cluster. A cluster is a group of people who are all born on the same day and are connected telepathically. They can communicate with each other, they have perceived tactile contact with one another, and they can borrow knowledge and skills from one another or even remote pilot each other. In the world of Sense8, Sense8s are all around the world living invisibly among us, but they all have their own clusters or groups of 8. Now, all Sense8s can communicate telepathically with one another once they make eye contact, but dedicated clusters are far more intimate. The story begins when we meet Daryl Hannah right before she dies, gives birth to the cluster, awakening their telepathy, then commits suicide. The cluster is composed of Capheus, played by Amel Emin, then by Toby Anwumer, Kala, played by Tina Desai, Lido, played by Miguel Angel Silvestre, Nomi, played by Jamie Clayton, Riley, played by Tuppence Middleton, Sun, played by Duna Bay, Will, played by Brian J. Smith, and Wolfgang, played by Max Remelt. The core cast is pretty good, as is pretty much the entire cast. Now, the cluster is pursued by an evil corporation called BPO, Biologic Preservation Organization, and their chief adversary of BPO is known by many names, but is called most commonly Whispers, played by Terrence Mann. Whispers is also a Sense8, but was part of another cluster who are now all dead. Now, Sense8 is significant in many ways. For one, it was done on the largest scale possible. Since these 8 people are from different parts of the world, production shot all around the world and no expense was spared. The cinematography was spectacular for that reason, and because every aspect of production was pushed to near perfection. The show also revolutionized storytelling, which would be expected from J. Michael Straczynski and the Wachowskis. Straczynski has been a writer of large and small screen comic books and was the creator and showrunner of one of the best, most beloved science fiction political space operas, Babylon 5. That show redefined American television as it was the first domestic TV show to have a closed story loop. The Wachowskis literally changed the way action movies were made in this country with the Matrix trilogy. Action martial arts movie would never be the same in American cinema. Coincidentally, I'm also a fan of Speed Racer, but not many are. Sense8 changed conventional storytelling. For one, the character interaction is very dynamic. Given that the characters, while physically separated by thousands of miles, can interact with each other as casually as if they're in the same room, it requires a bit of orientation for the audience, so the first couple episodes are kind of slow setting that up. After that, Sense8 very quickly settles into its rhythm. To be fair, the show paints with very broad strokes and bright colors, sometimes to the point of being cliché. Each character brings a specific skill set to the cluster. For example, Will is a Chicago police officer who has a knack for slipping handcuffs. He's often the morale leader of the cluster, and he can also shoot very well, and he can fight. Wolfgang, who is a German gangster, also knows how to fight and shoot, and is also relatively fearless. Whenever something dangerous needs to be done, Wolfgang is probably the first to do it. Kala is Indian and is a doctor. She's also very, very intelligent. Nomi is an American hacker. She and her life partner, Amanita, played by Freema Eichmann, pull off some of the most impressive and impossible real-time hacks you can imagine. Capheus is a matatu driver in Nairobi, Kenya, who has an affinity for Jean-Claude Van Damme. It seems that Capheus can drive or ride anything. He is also probably the most pure of heart character. Riley is Icelandic in origin but resides in Great Britain as a DJ, and she's also a great networker. Sun is a Korean businesswoman who is also devastatingly good at martial arts. And Leto is a Spanish actor with a flair for the dramatic. Since each one of the Sense8s brings a particular skill set to the table, there are many times when one character may be in a particular situation where another can lend a hand by either visiting and imparting knowledge to that character, or just pretty much take over and remote pilot them. Members of the cluster can jump in and out of each other as needed. Each of the characters is dealing with their own particular story arcs as well. Wolfgang, being a member of the criminal underworld in his native country, has to deal with the dynamics of that world. Kala is engaged to a man to whom she initially doesn't love, but does eventually fall in love with Wolfgang. Kaffius initially struggles as a matatu driver to make money for his mother who is dying from AIDS to afford medication. Later, he reluctantly runs for political office. Sun has one of the more challenging story arcs, as she was convinced by her father to take the fall for her brother's criminal misdeeds and goes to prison. Will struggles with issues with his father, which are complicated when he goes into hiding as he takes the first steps in taking on BPO, and inadvertently makes eye contact with Whispers. Riley and Will also are the first Sense8s to become involved romantically, and are the first members of the cluster to actually physically meet. Riley helps Will stay hidden, since Whispers can now connect to Will telepathically. Leto is a big Latin action star, but he is also gay, which means death to his career in his country, which makes his struggle pretty obvious, since he is trying to build a life with his life partner Hernando, played by Alfonso Herrera. Similarly, Nomi is transgender, having transitioned from male to female, and aside from legal entanglements from a life of hacking, seeks approval from her family that cannot accept her transitioning. One of the many things that Sense8 was successful at was staying on message without becoming an overt agenda piece. Even though the stories that focus on Leto and Nomi can be accused of being agenda-driven, their stories do not play as such. Rather, all of the characters in the cluster are relevant, and we as the audience can identify with each of their struggles. While it could be said that Lana and Lily Wachowski certainly and clearly have a vested interest in Nomi's arc, given that they are both transgender females, they and Jamie Clayton, the transgender actress who plays Nomi, deserve credit for making that character completely human and relatable, making any kind of message stand out only as much as any other character's desires to be recognized and accepted for who they are and wish to be. Another thing that Sense8 has done is redefine the family drama, which this story very much is. These very different characters who come from different parts of the world learn to very quickly trust and rely on each other. They also have a genuine, intimate love for one another, even sexually. But we'll come back to that. But for all practical intents and purposes, they are a family and they always have each other's backs. But the series has come to be defined by its grand storytelling, awesome cinematography, dynamic character interaction, and that strong, sexual, explicit content. Admittedly, some of the series' kinkier moments can be somewhat off-putting at first, but after a while it becomes clear that it is part of the story and the showrunners use it that way. Not pornographically, although the confusion is understandable. No other series has made orgies one of its trademarks in quite this way. The series is also stamped by its trademark action sequences, which once again are groundbreaking. In Season 2, there are 2 milestones reached. One is when Sun pursues her brother in an epic chase scene borrowing all the skills of the cluster, and another is when Wolfgang and the cluster fight his adversary Leela and her cluster. The intended end of the season sees nearly all of the cluster physically in one place, which was a satisfying payoff that the fans had waited to see. The finale movie, which has just dropped on the Netflix most recently, was satisfying, but it was clearly made as a love letter to the fans, and if I had one criticism, it plays that way. Now, it does build on the series as we know it and pushes even further into its redefinition of conventional storytelling. Smartly, it is packaged in with the end of Season 2. Watching the finale as a standalone movie would be a huge mistake. Just tracking the cluster's interaction when they are physically all together is challenging enough when you know what's going on. And you also must know these characters to appreciate that interaction. You also have to watch it through the lens of knowing that this finale was going to be the only opportunity the showrunners had to wrap everything up. The finale is, to be fair, a little messy, full of cliché, and falls short of wrapping up everyone's storyline. But given the circumstances, it couldn't be anything other than what it is. Bringing back 8 characters, most of all, and then their secondary characters attached to them, and still having to address the larger story arc, is a lot to accomplish in 2.5 hours' time. It's just not enough. But the upshot of that is, if there were ever an opportunity to bring back this story and to continue telling these stories, the door is wide open to do so. One of the smartest things that the producers did is at the end of the finale, the graphic appears for our fans. So with that, is Sense8 as a series worth the binge? Abso-fraggin-lutely. Not because it has some crazy action sequences, not because it has come to redefine conventional storytelling, not because the characters are strong in an ensemble, not even because it has recurring orgies, but because Sense8 is a modern family drama at its core, and it has real heart. But again, that is one opinion. What's yours? If you've seen Sense8, please share your comments below. And if you liked what you saw here today, please give us a like. And you are invited to join our family by clicking that subscribe button and the bell to be notified of new content. You have just been spoiled. Come back fresh next time and we'll do it again. See ya.